Welcome, my name is Theo Scherman. This is a presentation on the omnisentient world that's ahead of us. A world where intelligence is embedded in every aspect of everything we do and in the entire world and economy. What's ahead of us, I believe, in the next decade is the largest shift that we will see in human history or recorded history. A world where the next decade, will redefine business, industries, and even people. What it means to have a job, a job related to an hourly rate. So we will see shift across everything. And then the question is, what does that mean for people's identity? So the shift that is coming is not just an economic shift. It's not just around companies, how companies restructure themselves, but it's going to be an impact that will be rippled throughout everything. So the key with this is how does a city or a country like Singapore position themselves for this future, to be part of this omnisentient economy? How does it move its economy into this omnisentient economy? How does it transition in that? But before we get into that, what I thought is I'll start with saying, how do we get here? Why is this such a big impact? And then we'll go through the organizational and economic impact that we'll find. The first one, this is a slide that ARK Invest has done that really showcases very well why we have such a huge, enormous shift that's ahead of us. The last time in history that we had three technologies or technologies that follow close on top of each other was the early 1900s, between 1900 and 1917, where we had the telephone, the automobile, and electricity that came into the world or became, into the economy. And we know what that impact, has been for the world, since then. The key is, and since then we had computers and then we had the internet. Now we're standing at the doorstep where we have 6 technology clusters that are becoming mature. And, and I'll talk about the convergence and the impact on each other in a second, but we have never seen this impact, like I said, in recorded history. And that's why it's so significant. The 6 clusters we're talking about, is in the middle is intelligent cognition. And the reason why it's in the middle, it touches all the other, it converges with all the other main, segments that we have there. But we're going to have we call the bio-digital convergence, which is the, healthcare or the human side, energy side, the autonomous side, compute, and then trust value. But what's more important is the underlying technologies that are sitting inside these clusters. We have 25 technologies that are there, and AI is only one of those. So we have a world that's focusing on AI and what's happening with AI, but there's 25 of these technologies. So the key for us as companies, countries, is saying which of these are going to impact my company the most, which of these are going to have the biggest impact, and the convergence between these, and I'll show you in a second what I mean by that, is going to transform or disrupt an industry that we have. Just to highlight the size of what's ahead of us. If we look at 5 of those, AI, robotics, energy storage, DNA sequencing, and blockchain, that the enterprise value of those 5 will be 200 trillion by 2030. So we're talking about significant shifts that's ahead of us. But as I said, convergence is the key. And what I mean by convergence is, look at these 25 technologies. Within their own right, they'll have an enormous impact. But what we're finding, it's the influence that they have on each other that will disrupt complete industries. And in this example, I'll show you the following. If we look at the cluster that's getting highlighted on the screen right now, you'll see this cluster: artificial intelligence, next-gen cloud, IoT, edge sensors, blockchain, solid state, and then autonomous. That cluster will disrupt the auto industry. Not just how we as consumers buy and use a car, but how the company that makes it sells that car. So it disrupts the entire value chain. This will force car companies to say, we're going to stop selling your car and we will sell you rideshare. We'll come and sell you 500 hours a year. Now you can imagine the impact on the business models that are coming just because of this. And there's no choice. And that's the big thing. So for us as companies, we look at this and saying, what's the clusters that's going to disrupt our business? And how do we impact that? How do we offset? How do we change our business models to account for that? If we look at AI, just to give you a sense of the speed, right? If we just look at, and my sense is a lot of people are underestimating this. And I say we're sleepwalking into the shift that's coming. And the reason why I say that is we've been lulled into the comfort zone that for the last 30 years, we've basically had one technology come at a time, and we had time to adjust. We had the internet or computers, and then we had the internet, and then we had phones. And we taught ourselves as we went through that process. With these 25 that are coming, the impact is really, really significant, and it's very, very fast as it goes through. Give you a sense of that speed. OpenAI, just one of these AI, LLMs, in 2023, let's say 18 months ago, there are 2 million developers, 100 million ChatGPT users on a weekly basis, and 300 million tokens per minute. Now, a lot of people, we talk about tokens, a lot of people don't understand the volume of tokens that's already getting utilized and traded, or when I say traded, utilized within these AI systems. We'll talk about that a bit later. But if we then look at that and we look at forward today, we now have 4 million developers. 18 months later, we have 800 million weekly users, and we have 6 billion tokens per minute that's getting used. So the volume and the speed is just enormous. That's ahead of us. But what we're seeing is, when we talk about an omniscient world, we're seeing a world where we have digital and physical that are converging. That's becoming one. Where we're saying, where can I embed intelligence in my business? Where can I put, how can I embed intelligence into my operations, my products, my people? And that becomes the core focus. And then that becomes that omniscient world. And that will lead us into a world where we'll manage just 2 areas, and I'll cover that in a second. But before I get there, this is a very interesting chart that shows, out of the 11 industries we have, each industry will go through a crossover point where AI will go from a cost center to a net positive driver for revenue. Now, as you know, once we get there, it becomes just the scale. The more I put in, the more profit I generate. But if we look at that, we'll see 2 of these industries have passed over. The third one energy will pass over this year, and then the last one in this cluster will be construction, which will pass over in 2031. We basically break it into 3 groups there, right? We have our capital light data heavy industries, which will be that first cluster up to logistics. Then we have our industry, what I call moderate physical infrastructure. And then the last one is going to be your labor intensive cluster that'll go over. But the key is, by 2031, they've all passed over. So once again, if you look at your company and you look at the different components or the different sectors in there, at what stage are they going to pass over, in that process? But as I said earlier, by 2038, most companies, I'm saying 90% of companies, apart from people, will be managing 2 things. We'll be managing energy, and we'll be managing intelligence. So the question then is, how do I put more intelligence into my business, as I said, into my operations, into my people, into my product, into my supply or value chain? And then secondly, how do I power that? And why energy becomes so crucial is that if I can get my energy input cost to near zero, my profitability and my margins go through the roof. I can have a factory that can operate 24/7 with intelligent machines or robots in there, and at very, very, very good margins. So you can see how we are moving towards that world, and we'll talk about the people and how people interact in that world a bit later when we get to economic models. Before I jump into the transition that we're seeing, I thought let's just step back a bit. So if we look at the transition the world has gone through, and we're just going to just step back into pre-internet economy, we had a linear economy, which means I made one product and I sold it. And typically it was within region or within country and limited distribution, right? Then the internet came, that started opening up the floodgates. I started have the ability to showcase my products outside of my typical geography, and it expanded my reach. That led us to what we call the social economy. The reason why we break the social economy out separately, the social economy actually transformed information, not just how we view or where we get our information. Before social economy, we basically got it from a newspaper, a radio, and a television. Now 80% of information is produced by people, right? X, and then all the different channels that are out there. So it transformed information. The next was the collaborative economy, and that transformed the service industry. So we first started getting information from each other. Now we're starting to get services from each other, Airbnb, rideshare, etc. And there's a lot of these models that are coming. That led us to where we are today, which is called the hyper-connected economy, where we have the people with devices connected seamlessly across everything, right? The next will be what we call the machine-to-machine economy. After that, we know it's going to be augmented or well-being or augmented humans, and then off-planet. What we're trying to figure out now is, how do we move from this platform economy into this machine economy? How do we make that shift? What does it mean from a business model point of view, from a company point of view? And that leads us into what we call the omni-sentient economy. So for Singapore, that becomes the key. How do we transition the overall economy into that new world? That's what we'll cover a bit later. So if we then look at that with the hyper-connected economy, humans and devices, on the machine economy, I have AI agents and autonomous systems that I'm connecting. And then how do I run that as this overall unit that will then transform my business? So if we then look at that, we see we have 9 platforms that our companies will have internal that will run that stack. So, but the key is that's your operational framework for the future. That's how you're going to run what your company will have. You'll have 9 platforms that will operate as a unit inside your company. Right. So if we then look at that and we look at the actual business impact that it's going to have. So on the hyperconnected economy, your focus is your IoT integration, which a lot of companies have been busy with for quite a while. Then you have your digital equity, your smart contracts, and your community-centric focus, right? And we've seen that. Now that unlocks business models. Now most of us have been seen or used as a service model. You're going to start seeing co-ownership model, digital equity model, your circular economy. These are new models that are starting to emerge in the marketplace. But when we go to the machine economy, that it really gets interesting. Here, my focus is going to be AI agents, robots, and machines that will actually participate in the whole economic market, right? You have device-to-device and AI-to-AI transactions that need to take place. So think about what that does from a transaction, from a border point of view, etc., from a fintech point of view, etc. If we then look at the business models, that's when it really starts expanding, and that's where companies need to start understanding that we will have to transition our economic models and our framework to take part in this new economy. So we have autonomous commerce that will take place, which means you'll have machines that will negotiate, interact, and transact on their own. Won't come back for permission. And we'll look at the framework, what we need to do to get that done in a second. Then you have your self-governed platform. Now, what happens with that is your DAOs, your smart contracts, and distributed ownership. What we believe is what will become a key foundation in economies is real-world asset tokenization. So, give you an example. If you have an asset that is revenue generating, as an example, let's use a toll road, or you want to build a bridge, put a toll road on the bridge. If you take if you could tokenize half that asset, and then for the full input cost or the capital cost on the front end of that asset, right? So think about this. I take the asset, it's going to cost me $100 million as an example. I tokenize 50% of that for $100 million, which means I own an asset at zero, basically, capital cost on my books. But that asset now, if I have a token now as a citizen or as an investor in that bridge, that token firstly is going to escalate in value because the value of the bridge overall increases. But secondly, as the cars drive over it and it generates revenue, I get a payment from my token, right? So my token becomes a revenue sharing asset that'll keep on paying me over years. Now, the reason why tokenization is that opens up the borders, which means anybody anywhere in the world can buy a token in that bridge. You're not just talking about the limited population within your country or within your city or within your community. And you can do that without a contract, without a lawyer, basically without a bank. So that's why we'll see tokenization explode. And there you can start seeing why regulation becomes key, right? How do you frame that framework to take place in your country, in your city? And then we'll have digital twins. That becomes your forecasting models, your synthetic service providers, and the economic intelligence, right? So the key becomes you can see a whole transformation when we move into this machine economy and what that means. Now, if we look at now from an omnisentient business point of view, what does that mean from an organizational operational point of view? So currently we work on a pyramid structure, right? And this comes from the Industrial Revolution, where we have leadership at the top, then we have another layer of management, we have middle management, and as it goes down, the message goes down through the company, and we have people that then touch our clients. Now, the model is flawed, and the reason why these organizations become so big is that you launch a new product, you have people with that, you have marketing with that, and that take that product to market, and then you have a whole service industry. Then you launch another product, you have another group of people do that. So as your company grows, you add more and more and more people. The problem you have is that what we found is that middle management layer starts making career decisions and not company decisions, where they don't want to take risks because they don't want to risk their career, so that they become risk adverse and the whole process starts slowing down. So the issue is, how do you plug AI into this organization, right? So you say, I'm going to have AI that's going to autonomously make a transaction. Where does it report? Where does it get its instruction, to go and do that? So it becomes difficult. So the way we see the framework of this new economy, but what we have to cover off and what we have to design for is an organization where I have humans, I have AI agents, and I have infrastructure that operate independently but seamlessly aligned, right? So they need to execute on the same direction, the same input that we have to get out, but they have to operate basically still independently. So who are those stakeholders? First one, on the human side, you have your leadership, but the interesting thing is here, your investors, your token holders, your community contributors, your customers all become part of your community, all become human stakeholders in this organization. So when we talk to, as an example, let's take an airport. So for an airport, the community that moves through the airport becomes super important in the future, because that community can become potential token holders and owners in that actual infrastructure that they travel through. So think about communities that you support your company or that use your product. They become future owners in your business. So as an example, think about McDonald's. 99% of people that eat at McDonald's today are not shareholders in McDonald's. But think about a future where your patrons or your clients become shareholders through token ownership in the community they belong to or the company they support. So that's where we start talking about where it gets interesting. Then you have your AI agents. These AI agents, your digital twins, your machine APIs, etc. Anything digital, but they become intelligent, which means they can operate by themselves. And then lastly, you have your infrastructure, the infrastructure that now gets intelligence in there, so your robot can think for itself and it can actually operate on its own direction and then go from there. So as I said, how do we get those things to operate? So the future organization is like an organism. The three stakeholders I said are there, and the way we get them to unite is by those 9 platforms I showed you earlier that unite. That starts with the protocol layer, which sets out, I'm not going to go into that detail today, but it's a framework that sets out, this is where we're going to go. The CEO becomes your signal caller that says, this is the framework, this is where we want to go, and then this whole organization aligns and executes on that. If we then look at the transformation that happens, we have a layered command and control framework on the traditional system. We have centralized decision making. We have fixed roles and manual workflow. We have top-down communication. We've designed and control efficiency, right? So everything's about control. How do we drive this huge organization with all these people and make sure that everything's aligned? We're going into an organization now. We have distributed ownership. We have self-orchestrated intelligence. We have real-time augmented responsiveness. You have fluid, autonomous, hybrid AI human execution, real-time bidirectional signal and feedback. So you can see you're moving into a distributed organization that is designed for adaptability and emergence, and that can move, right? So move much quicker pace than we currently have. So timelines. So what does it mean from an overall timeline point of view? So we are managing 3 timelines between now and 2038. The first one is your intelligence transformation. We have everything in place to do this transformation. So as a company, there's nothing stopping you to put this in place right now. So it's your AI intelligent agents that you can start implementing, your digital platforms, which, as I said, creates your entire foundation, your framework for your company, your algorithmic workflows, your digital currencies. This basically will redefine how your business is getting done and how it operates. That will then lead you into what we call the next one, which is physical transformation. Now, that's a 2038 transformation. The reason why the timeline is longer is there's resource restrictions currently, right? We've heard about rare earth metals. We think there's technologies that will become mature, as an example, solid-state batteries. So there's technologies that are still being developed, and it's resource restricted, and that's why we have a longer time frame on that. But it's clean energy transition, which will transform anything as because of the cost input on the front end, advanced manufacturing robots, and autonomous infrastructure. And that will rewrite the physical foundation of the economy. And then the third timeline we're managing is from now till 2038, what we call bridging technologies. These are your AI being integrated in your IoT edge, right? So give you edge intelligence, your blockchain Web3 infrastructure, which means is how do an AI operate and do a transaction with another AI and getting paid, right? And what does that mean between digital currency and fiat currency, and how do you structure that for your company? Your quantum computing, and then your coordination platform. So these will mature over time, but the issue we have is whether you run one robot in your factory, which is with intelligence, or whether you run 1,000, you still need a platform to run them. So that's why these are bridging technologies, where you have to then start saying, okay, I'm going to start implementing some of these platforms as we go through that process. Right, impact. What does that mean, impact-wise? So what is collapsing and what is rising? Very simple. What's collapsing is there. Labor-driven competitiveness goes. Fixed path supply chains go. Layered scale modeling goes. What replaces those is AI native industries, right? AI first. It becomes our focus, digital physical integration, and then intelligent value networks. So that's what's collapsing, and that will be replaced by what's coming. Now we get into a city, right, or a country. So in this case, Singapore. How does a global city stay competitive in an intelligent era transformed into omni-sentient economy? So how do we take this economy, move it into an omni-sentient economy, and what does that transition look like? How do we do that? And we go through the process, and that's what we're going to talk about. Now, I believe that Singapore's got a significant opportunity globally. And the reason for that is that if you look at the political framework, Singapore has got the ability to make decisions and move. A lot of other countries are currently stuck with a lot of noise on either sides, right? And they are struggling to make decisions in a world that's transforming at a pace that they probably can't keep up with. So I think it really puts Singapore into a place where I think that Singapore can build a prototype, right, of how nations function with this intelligent, self-regulating global trust system. It's a system that really has become omniscient and can be the showcase and get exponentially ahead of other cities worldwide. Okay, so if we then look at that. So when we say Singapore is a sentient economic hub, what does that mean? The key, though, is these are not 5 independents. These are 5 policies that can't be separated. So they all work together to deliver that outcome. So the first one is going to be your platform. So think about how do we basically transform everything and get everything connected onto a platform, right? So whether it's a company, whether it's a person, whether it's public, whether it's organizations, how do we bring them onto a platform? Secondly, how do we then implement or ingest intelligence into that platform, right? Or into that process or into that system. Thirdly, we then look at the talent layer. How do I create talent layer? The fourth one's going to be your digital twin layer, which you then start running it. And then your last one is going to be your trust layer. So those 5 then give you an omniscient economy as we go through it. And we'll look through each of these individually and see what they mean. The first one, platform. So we believe the omniscient economy runs on connected intelligence, right? So the first thing is, those that can navigate the connected flows across the platforms, right, will be center at the next economy. Will be the focus, or will be positioned perfectly for this next economy. So the first one is, how do I create a platform, as I said, where I can bring everything on, where I can bring everybody into, and then from there I can then have and then help manage that process. So what is it like? So think of Singapore national platform stack, a trusted digital backbone where global firms, startups, and AI plug into, operate, and trade and collaborate securely across APAC. So think about this framework. Once it's established, it can then trade outside as well. So how do we get there, right? The sense here is Singapore goes ahead and builds an intelligent platform stack. Stack I showed you earlier on. Think about those 9 platforms, right? Those get shared free as a national platform stack to companies, agencies, and institutions. So they have access to that, which runs on the stack, and they can access and plug into that platform and operate, right? Develop APIs that standardize what that framework looks like. Incentivize platforms as service creation. There's obviously in the deployment, there's all the incentives around that. Now, what's the impact on that? Firstly, it multiplies the foreign investment because the investments see the framework of what's happening. They say this and this is secure. This is where we want to invest our money. And it transforms Singapore into this platform nation where, once again, we're getting everybody onto the platform. Next step is how do we bring intelligence into that next framework, right? So AI is no longer a tool. It becomes infrastructure. So the key here becomes is look at AI as we look at water, as we look at electricity. It needs to be something that's available for every company, every citizen, every organization, free of charge, or let's say for companies then at a cost of energy usage of what it makes to cost to run it. But my recommendation is for citizens free, which means it becomes equitable where everybody has access to intelligence and can utilize that intelligence to drive forward, right? So what is it? It's a national AI grid. So think about it as everybody in the country has ability, or the city has ability to get water. everybody has the ability to get AI, get intelligence, build your own AI system that runs and that everybody gets access to, right? So shared compute foundational model, digital sandboxes available for every citizen, startup, SME, enterprise, and then public as a public utility. So once again, that accelerates the entire intelligence of the entire country, right? So establish the Singapore AI Infrastructure Authority to manage compute models and access, build sovereign AI compute capacity for energy efficient data centers, the whole framework that goes around that, and then provide AI, credits and startups for SMEs, educational institutions, etc., etc. So what gets charged for that? That's the same discussion you'll have around what you pay for water, as an example, or for energy. But the key is everybody needs to have access to that to make it equitable and accelerate that. But remember what we're doing. We're firstly getting the platform established. Now we're plugging intelligence into it. And then the next one you'll see, then we're going to firstly go to the AI hub, or the talent hub, sorry. But we'll cover this all first. So what's the impact? Position Singapore as the world's most trusted, transparent AI innovative hub, which means it's equitable. Everybody has that. By treating AI as infrastructure, Singapore ensures the equitable transparency and trust for everybody has access to AI. Now, next is now what we create, AI talent exchange. So the key is this: how does Singapore plug into a global talent hub that it can have access to, that it can utilize to grow the actual economy, that it can actually showcase and basically offer to the rest of the world? So this is what the suggestion is. Singapore will build a global talent exchange where the world's top human experts and AI agents showcase their talent and their capabilities through verified digital identities, smart contracts, enabling borderless collaboration, positioning Singapore as the center of the world's talent flow. So think about that. And the reason and way you can do that is combine that with immigration policies, right? So you can be very, very smart with that, but launch a talent as a service platform exchange with global reach. So it becomes a standard where anybody that says, I've got AI, I've got talent that I can showcase, I'm going to put it on this platform and then showcase that talent. Singapore's advantage is it gets to see the best talent in the world and then can attract that talent, right? Position Singapore as the brain hub for the intelligent economy, nation exports coordination, and not just labor. Unlocks global talent to come through the gate. So now think about with three again. Build a platform, bring all the data in there. Next one is put intelligence in there. Third one is bring the people in with your talent. Now we have a framework that we say now we can actually run our models. Now we get to our digital twin. Now you get to a place where you become self-smart and self-aware. Now you put the framework and saying, how do I manage that and how do I run that, right? So Singapore sense, simulate, adapt in real time because now it becomes omnisentient. So real-time national data that continuously learns, predicts, and orchestrates the economy before disruption occurs. Not just smart, but self-aware. And you can see why you need those first three layers to get to this point where you can then have that and go through that process. So integrate IoT, 5G, edge AI across all critical infrastructure systems, right? Incorporate data from the intelligent platform stack to the talent exchange, mandate digital twin layers and national projects, and develop a national operational dashboard for visualization, coordination, self, and real-time response. And once again, what does that do? It makes Singapore the world's first aware self-optimized economy because it's got those components in place. Singapore's digital twin becomes a regional control tower, operating, predicting, insights, manages supply chains, energy grids, and logistics across Asia. So once again, once it's established, it can then reach out. And then obviously the last one is going to be your trust layer, right? Is owning the intelligent trust layer. And that's once again, that's Singapore's history, right? Saying you can trust us, we can put the systems in place. And what it is, it's a trust digital network. It's basically putting the framework in place that says we will drive a national, we'll develop a national AI integrity framework that's audit verified system so people can trust it and trust the framework, trust the data that comes from there and runs that. So that becomes your overall framework that then brings all this together. So if we then look at the 5 steps there, you'll see you have your platform, you have your intelligence, you have your talent, and those first 3 is what we call your aggregation phase, and then you have that management and then your trust layer that you put on top of that. You can see how that translates that and transforms it into an omnisentient economy. Now, there is a missing layer, I think, that still needs to be addressed. And I think that's going to be your digital currency side, right? So digital currency can become the framework of how it transacts, right? So AI cannot function at scale without variable identity, tamper-proof logs, smart contracts, and autonomous transactions. And then it needs programmable finance, decentralized economic systems, and digital currency as a service. So the key becomes is that Singapore needs to create the framework where we can onboard and offboard between digital currency and traditional what we call fiat currency, right? So there need to be that seam. So companies can then operate in this AI world, this digital world where their AI agents can transact and machine to machine can transact, as well as the traditional one. And we need that connection to be made. So that's an area where I think that work still needs to get done as we go through that. Cities that win in the next decade won't be the fastest or the biggest, but they'll be the ones that sense, adapt, and orchestrate intelligence better than anyone else. So it becomes about intelligence, as we've seen, and then the key is that I always say, those that won't collapse, they'll just become irrelevant. And I think Singapore's got such a big opportunity worldwide that they can take, to get this right. And then last I said, Singapore was born out of constraint and turned into clarity. In the age of intelligence, that clarity can now once again lead the world. So this is a conversation, right? So please, love your comments, love to have a discussion around that. So thank you for listening.